the second contrarian idea that is, of course, we can sort of talk about how fast these things are happening and how much is happening in technology generally. And it's one of these things where we live in a world of incredible scientific and technical precision. We can measure Avogadro's number or the fine structure constant in physics or other things like this to many, many significant figures. But when we talk about the nature of the progress of science and technology and how fast science or technology are progressing, we do this in the most qualitative way with incredibly little precision. And are we accelerating in scientific and technical fields? Are we progressing, but at a slower pace? How fast is this? And with respect to that question, we tend to only get these sort of fairly vague answers. And I would submit that the sort of consensus in sort of both a Silicon Valley and a sort of academic context is that we are doing great and everything is just moving super fast. It's sort of all these forms of accelerationism, and we can debate whether it's utopian, a la Kurzweil, the singularity is near, all you need to do is sit back and eat some popcorn and watch the movie of the future unfold, or perhaps it is dystopian, a la all the science fiction movies from Hollywood, and the robots are going to kill you, or you're going to be in this matrix, and we're sort of accelerating to utopia or accelerating to dystopia. And the somewhat contrarian thesis I have on this is always that perhaps the progress is not as fast as advertised, and that we've been in this world where things have been slower, and they've been slower for quite some time. One cut on this is always to differentiate the world of atoms and bits, and that since the 1970s we've had a narrow cone of progress around atoms. Around bits, computers, internet, mobile internet, software. These have been advancing fairly quickly. The world of atoms somewhat more slowly. When I was an undergraduate at Stanford, I would in the late 80s. I would say that almost every engineering field in retrospect was a bad field to go into. It was already obvious that you shouldn't go into nuclear engineering, aeroastroengineering weren't that good. But even all these other fields were not going to do that well in the decades ahead, because electrical engineering was still okay. Computer science was the really good field to go into in the late 80s. All the other engineering fields, it was just regulated to death. There wasn't that much you could do in the world of atoms. And it turned out that we had a lot of slowed progress. And I think that if we sort of analyze this question of the rate of scientific progress politically, and think of it as sort of university professors or entrepreneurs or venture capitalists exaggerating about how much good they're doing and how great they are, we understand that the incentives are always to exaggerate and to say that we're just around the corner from curing cancer, we're around the corner in all these different things, and yet it's been in some significant way slower over the last 40 or 50 years. Certainly, one of the concerns I would have is that that perhaps the danger is that, if anything, that things are slowing down even more at this point, and that the sort of world of very fast progress in bits is actually starting to slow down. And if we look at the rate of progress in Silicon Valley, it was sort of charismatic in this because it was the one place where things were still happening relative to the rest of the U.S. And it's become a lot less charismatic in the last 5 years. If you sort of think about the vibe in 2014, even as recently as 2014, it was sort of this was the place where the future was being built. In 2019, the big tech companies are probably as self-hating in some ways as the big banks were in 2009, and there's sort of a sense that it's not quite working. And so if you sort of, again, to pick on Google a little bit here, the Google propaganda of the future was all going to be bits. It was all going to be sort of more automation. The story in 2014 were things like Google Glasses, so you could identify anybody you looked at any time. It was the self-driving car. I would say these aren't like that big in a set of innovations. Probably a self-driving car is a step from a car, but not as big as a car was from a horse. And So you can sort of debate quite how big these things are and how to quantify them again. But that was still the narrative that was very intact in 2014. And when you fast forward to 2019, it's striking how there's absolutely no narrative of the future left. Google doesn't even talk about the self-driving car very much. There's a sense that it may still happen, but it's further in the future. The expected time seems to be getting further away every passing year. The expected time is getting even further into the future. And so there's sort of the sense that perhaps there's this danger that we have slowed progress, even in tech, even in the world of information technology. One of the ways this stagnation thesis sort of was embedded in the language is the word technology, of course, had a very different meaning. In the 1960s, technology meant not just computers, but also rockets and supersonic aviation and underwater cities and the green revolution in agriculture and biotechnology and new medicines and all these things, because all these things were progressing on many fronts. And today, if you use the word technology, it is often synonymous with information technology and probably just the software internet part of that, because that's the only part that has been moving, that has been progressing in recent decades. And the danger is that even that has slowed down a lot, that somehow Silicon Valley is consolidated into some larger companies. It's gotten harder for new companies to break through, and it's gotten harder because small companies are good at doing new things, and people are doing fewer new things than the big companies are more dominant. And so I think the second cut on the Life After Google book in these terms is always what I think is the sort of Gilder's always super optimistic, but there is like a small undercurrent of pessimism to the book. And the undercurrent is, the specter that haunts life after Google is that maybe this current regime is going to go on for a really long time. And, there was life after television, but life after Google may take, it will happen eventually, but it may take a little bit longer, and that that there is a danger that we're in this somewhat slowed, somewhat stagnant world. So that's sort of a second idea that I think we need to always grapple with a lot, that maybe we're in this world of tech stagnation.